Hello, welcome to Ethics Fundamentals. My name is Guthrie. I am a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois. I went to law school at the Loyola University School of Law here in Chicago, where I currently live. I have an undergrad degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin, and I wanted to make a course all about ethics. Now, this is not philosophical ethics, though I do touch on the big concepts and ideas behind ethics. You couldn't talk about it without it. But really, it's all about applied ethics. There's this whole thing in sort of philosophy where I say this and you say that, and we both have good points. And that was at the end we say, okay, well, that was a lot of fun. I guess we'll just move on now, right? Like, you don't get anywhere. I mean, my worry, or at least the problem I was trying to solve with this course, is how can we move ethics from that philosophical domain of that was fun, that was cool, whatever, to actually making changes, to making products and services more ethical, to be able to have these conversations in your workspace, in your organization, which I think is so important. So the application of these big concepts and ideas and how to actually apply them in the real world, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I was trying to achieve. So here are some sort of big things, okay, that I plan on covering. All right. So the first thing is we have to talk about the big concepts behind ethics. Like you got to start somewhere. It's really fascinating. Again, this isn't the 12-hour lecture on all the big philosophy ideas. I cover some of the important ones, but just know, if you're curious in that, there are much better courses that kind of stay in that intellectual philosophy realm. But I do cover some of it. Okay, we're going to talk about the ethical formula that I created, because how can you compare one thing to the other? It's really hard to do. I came up with an ethical formula so that you can get a number for a product and service based on what your target audience is, so that when you go to your boss, to your manager, when you talk about these things in a room, you can be like, well, let's run it. We have two options. Which one's more ethical? We'll run it twice. There's a formula that you can actually use and get an outcome. Again, applied ethics moving forward. We're going to talk about some big ideas about ethics in the corporate world. The corporate world is especially interesting, and it has its own little twist from what I would consider, personal ethics or maybe societal ethics. The corporate world is interesting, so we'll talk about some big ideas there. We're going to talk about the ethics of nudges and behavior change. People use the word nudge all the time for all sorts of behavior change, but there's a spectrum of behavior change. Some behavior change is gentle and gently pushes you one direction. Some behavior change is really intense. And so really intense behavior change, you're sort of opening yourself up to perhaps more unethical behavior, dark patterns. We'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, I want to talk about inspiring ethical change. The first thing I want to do is I want to inspire you to be interested about obviously making a change, moving from somewhat unethical to more ethical in your products and services, but also just inspiring you to be interested, to think about these ideas, to learn more about these topics. Sure, take the full certificate. I think that's great. But just as a framework, as a reference, a way to get started, it requires that internal inspiration and to inspire others to think this topic is important. So that's sort of the big ideas that we're going to walk through in this fundamentals course. I am so excited that I was able to put this together for you. I think these things are really cool, really smart, really fun. So let's get started. Let's talk about big concepts behind ethics. So I couldn't have a course on ethics and not introduce these huge fundamental ideas that are just critical to understanding the field. That said, I'm trying to focus on applied ethics moving forward. And a lot of these big ideas, they're so amazing because there's I say this and you say this, and we both have good points. And we get to the end and we look at each other and say, okay, that was fun, right? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but the ideas are so important and foundational that I think it would be wrong of me not to introduce them. Now, there are whole, college PhDs that you can get on these topics, and then there are some really awesome, 12-hour YouTube lectures where they condensed all of that into like 12 hours. And then for the ethics certificate, I condensed that into about 90 minutes. And now I'm going to take that 90 minutes and condense it down into like 5 minutes. Okay, so just know that this is a sliver of a sliver of a sliver. And it's just barely scratching the surface. So without wasting any more time on that introduction, let's dive into some just really fundamental, huge ideas and concepts behind ethics. The first is, what even are ethics? Like, what does that even mean? Where should we start? And a way that I really like to define it is, what would you die for? And I encourage you to pause this video and just write down, what are the list of things you would die for? It's a really good practice, actually, to determine what actually are the fundamental, most important things to you. What are the things that you value most in an ethical manner? It might give you hey, start here first. Another big concept, this is sort of the Aristotle question, what is the good life? And this is a personal ethic, okay? So how do I know what's good and what's bad? And I'll give you 3 people and what they say. So there's first Kant, who is a Western thinker and philosopher. He says we have a duty to do what's right, a duty to humanity and to God. But there's a duty, right? That's what's right. Do the right thing, okay? Then you have Nietzsche, who says, no, that's silly. The only thing that matters is individual strength. This idea of a duty to do what's right, that's weak-minded talk. What's actually important is strength. The winners get to write the laws. The winners get to decide what's good and what's bad. Strength is what's important. The Übermensch, the ultimate man. And then you have Jeremy Bentham, and Jeremy Bentham has sort of the economics utilitarian argument. So that goes, well, how do we know what's right? Well, just calculate what brings people the most happiness and contentedness or utility, and it's a formula, and you can add it up, and then whatever comes up with the highest score, go with that. So the classic example, of course, is the trolley problem, which goes like this. You are standing next to a track, and a trolley is rolling down the track, and it is about to hit and kill 5 people who are working on the track. Okay? Now, in front of you is a lever, and there's a split in the track coming up ahead, and you could, if you wanted, pull the lever, diverting the trolley, but it would hit and kill 1 person who's standing by on the track over there. So what is the right thing to do? Do you sit there and do nothing and let the trolley drive in and kill 5? Or do you pull the lever and divert the train and kill the 1? So this is where, when I say there's not really a good answer, there's not a good answer, but it's important to think about these kind of concepts. Bentham would say, pull the lever, because the death of the 1 is a better outcome than the death of 5. So what you want to do is maximize the best outcome here. Pull the lever, kill the 1. Now, of course, Kant would say, no. Is not doing nothing morally better than killing a person? If you pull the lever, you are the person who has caused the death of a person, whereas before you were just an innocent bystander. So there's not that each side has a perfectly valid argument to refute the other. There's not a right answer to the trolley problem. That's why it's a trolley problem. But it's but you probably maybe have an instinct about where you stand on this list. So just that idea that there are different ways to think about ethics. The idea of like who gets to say what's good. Should something be illegal to buy? Should you be able to sell your own heart, and kill yourself? Should you be able to, take drugs that are really bad for you? Like, who gets to decide these big questions? Is it the laws? Who gets to pass the laws? Who gets to be the judge of what's right and wrong? The majority? Individuals? So these are like big, huge, important questions that I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is, but it's important when you're talking about ethics that you recognize how difficult and complicated and important these kind of questions are. The last big thought that I'll leave you with here is basically this idea of, is there sort of a universal ethic? And I want to start all the way back with a guy called St. Augustine. And there's this idea in the Judeo-Christian world, because he was a Christian thinker, basically that when humans got kicked out of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, they were one with God, and then they became separated. And over time, more and more truth, the universal truth, is being revealed to humanity about what God wants them to do, and they sort of become closer to God. And there's this so there's this maybe feeling in a lot of the Judeo-Christian cultures of progress, of moving towards a better ethic, an arc of history, and it's bending towards justice. This idea that slowly things are moving in the correct, ethical direction, and maybe it's 10 steps forward and 9.5 steps back, but slowly over time we're moving towards this better, more ethical outcome. And that's this idea of a universal ethic. Some may argue, no. Ethics are just whatever society says they are, and as society changes, the ethics changes. But it doesn't mean that one society is better than the other. Whereas other people would say, no, there is a universal ethic, and we're moving towards that. Now, the one thing I will say is that there is some biological evidence for somewhat of a universal ethic. There are some biological things that are hardwired into us that, regardless of society, we have. So, for example, laughing, smiling, crying, craving what I call the pleasures of the flesh. So that's sex and food and sweet things and water and just like getting pet, right? We really enjoy those same sort of physical attributes. So there are these fundamental sort of human. There's like you can go all the way down, but there's a bedrock to sort of the human experience. And because there's a bedrock of a human experience, maybe there's a huge variety in the amount of ethics that could happen, but there's a box somewhere. There is some sort of universal, like, love is good. And that's, how that manifests is very open for interpretation. But there is sort of like a framework, right? Like, we as humans need to love. And maybe it's to love our children, or maybe it's to love the tribe, or whatever, right? But like, we have this sort of biological basis for, hey, maybe that's where there is a universal ethic, at least a place to start. So those are just some really big concepts about ethics. Ethics is such a fascinating, interesting journey of the mind, and I hope that you continue to think about these issues. And if you are curious, there are lots of amazing YouTube videos. Michael Sandel has a really great, 12-hour lecture that I spoke about on YouTube. Go check those out. So those are just some big concepts behind ethics. I wanted a way for people to be able to apply ethics in the real world, to move the discussion about ethics beyond I say this and you say this and we'll agree to disagree, to be able to get somewhere with it. So I came up with the ethical formula, and it's a way that you can use this ethical formula. You can go to the website, and I coded a whole nice little calculator for you. You can follow the instructions, and when you do that, you get a score, and it tells you if the thing that you want to determine if it's ethical or unethical, whether it's product or service or an action or an inaction. You can just say, is my mobile app generally ethical? And it will give you a score if it's generally ethical or generally unethical for a specific target audience. That's what it's for. So I'm going to give a very, very quick summary here, just like hyper quick about what it is. For more details on how exactly to use it, I encourage you to go to the website, because I'm going to have another video that actually gives the detail about how to use the program, how the importance of how these things work, and I'm going to do that later. Okay, so this is just a very quick summary. Basically, the way it works is you have, again, the thing that you want to figure out if it's how ethical, generally ethical or generally unethical it is, and you have a target audience. Why a target audience? Well, Attila the Hun is going to have different ethical preferences than some very progressive person in Stockholm, Sweden, right? Different people have different things that they find ethical or unethical. And so this is very much a garbage in, garbage out. If you give it the inputs, it will give you outputs for those inputs. So if you have, you have to make sure that you're running it for your particular situation, for your target audience. So this is the part where I skip how to actually use it, blah, blah, blah. At the end, you get a score, okay? Between 10, which is very unethical, to 2, which is generally ethical. And you can use this formula, okay, for a bunch of different ways. You can compare different products and services, compare different scores, compare progress over time. Maybe you want to try to make things more ethical over time. You can make an argument that, okay, this is better than this, or create company policies to say we're only doing ethical actions when it's, under a 7. But most importantly, it gives people this tool to be able to say, hey, I think our product is unethical. I ran it and actually I got an 8, right? And it's pretty unethical. My feeling, I can now have a number. I can justify this and I can sort of show my work, right? This is what I did to come up with this number. If you disagree with the inputs, that's fine. But then now we can have a conversation about, well, I actually think that this value is more important than this value. And maybe that'll change the final number, but you have a number you can walk in and use. And so that's why I think it's so important to sort of have that formula to move somewhere. A lot of times when we're talking about making, especially in the corporate world, ethics a better place, we're talking about moving, let's try to move our product from a 7 to a 6, right? Like, not everything is going to be perfectly ethical, awesome all the time, always, but just to maybe work on that low-hanging fruit and move just a little bit is so important. So that's some big thoughts about the ethical formula. If you want more information, we'll have, I'm gonna have a separate video that is a walkthrough about how to actually use it, and we'll set that aside for later because we don't have time in fundamentals to do that right now. So that is just a little bit about the ethical formula.